Hey guys, this is Mike, letusreason.com. There's a concerning shift that's been happening in recent decades that I want to address today. This is something that's been happening within Bible prophecy circles that believe in a pre-tribulation rapture, as of course I do. And this is a shift away from the biblical view of the imminence of the pre-trib rapture, or the catching away of the church. It's a shift away from the traditional pre-trib view of imminence, which has always been understood according to the plain normative meaning, the actual English definition of the word imminence, which is that nothing else is required to happen first in order for us to expect the rapture. It's the biblical teaching that the rapture has no preconditions, no prerequisites from our current standpoint in time. There's nothing to say that the rapture couldn't happen in the next 5 minutes or the next 5 seconds. It's the possibility of an any moment occurrence. The rapture doesn't hinge on other events that we're waiting to see first. And that's what the English word imminence actually means. That's the actual definition. It's something that's ready to occur always on the immediate horizon. And this was the teaching of Jesus and the first century church, who were the authors, of course, of the New Testament. That was always the traditional understanding of a pre-trib believer. You simply understand rapture imminence based on the normative English definition of the actual word imminence. But I want you to notice something that's been happening among popular pre-trib teachers, and it's been on the rise for the past several decades especially. There's a notable departure from this normal understanding and a movement instead towards a redefinition, a redefining of the word imminence to now include signs, sensationalism, and predictability. And I have to believe that this has a lot to do with the rise of prophecy ministries that receive income from their viewers. And it's been fueled by YouTube and the internet, where if you uphold the traditional view of the simple definition of imminence, then you're going to very fast run out of exciting things to talk about. And you won't be able to exercise the sensationalism aspect, which a lot of people like. Prophecy has unfortunately become a business, and sensationalism and signs and doom and gloom and fear that the tribulation is a week from Tuesday, is really a lucrative business model for a lot of people. It's like the news media. All you hear about are the sensational things and also the bad things. People are addicted to sensationalism and fear, and the prophecy world is really, unfortunately, no different. These people are selling you something, even if it's just you watching their videos. They earn an income off of that. And so, therefore, they have a vested interest in keeping you entertained. Actually, this is a huge problem in churches as well. Not really so much from the standpoint of Bible prophecy, but just the general dumbing down of people through emphasizing excitement and entertainment over sound and systematic Bible teaching. People will sit through a 3-hour concert, but they'll fall asleep within a half hour of actual sound Bible teaching. So it's important that you're aware of this shift away from the traditional view of imminence into a view that instead tries to redefine it in order to accommodate signs. And some of them are actually going as far as to accuse those of us like myself who uphold the traditional view or the plain definitional view, the real view, as being an extreme view. But no, changing the definition of a word to accommodate your narrative is the extreme view. But the reasoning behind this, like I already mentioned, seems simple enough. It helps oftentimes in life to just see things in terms of perspective or incentive. See things by the incentives. You can normally see why someone's deviating off the path. You can understand why they're doing so normally pretty easy just by looking at the simple incentives for doing so. Now, I'm not saying that everyone falls into this, but my personal opinion is that many of them do. And it's simply what I've already told you. For these people to be relevant to a large audience that wants to have their ears tickled with sensational rapture entertainment, they have to find a way to bend the definition of imminence to work in this whole thing of signs watching. Now, signs is where excitement is for a lot of people. They love it. It gets them excited, and people are drawn to stuff like that. It's entertainment based. There's no biblical support for it, of course, so they have to take passages out of context to fit their views, and they rely on inferences on top of inferences. Now, outwardly, they still claim to believe in imminence, these Bible teachers, but the reality is that they simply want their cake but want to eat it too. And they sort of hope that you won't notice or ask any questions or really hold them accountable to the actual definitions of words, much less scripture. And it's a lot like what we see in politics. But what I'm going to do in this video is try to expose all of it from the Bible, from the standpoint of the English language, from simple logic. I'm going to expose all of it in this video. And because there's a lot to expose, it's going to take some time. Now, we could make this video 2 or 3 or 4 times the length that it's actually going to be. I could probably talk about this for 8 hours straight, but I want to make this somewhat reasonable. So we're not going to talk about everything that we could talk about. But we're going to try to cover a bunch of the recent statements by a lot of these folks, these prophecy teachers who advocate for this redefined view of imminence. So the reality is that by redefining imminence to involve watching for signs, these prophecy teachers are really putting themselves into the date setter camp. By saying that there are observable signs in the world that give us some indication of the nearness of the rapture, some ability to judge it, its nearness, then you're making yourself a date setter. Now, I want to say that there's degrees of date setters. They're not all the same. But within the pre-trib camp, there are these different categories, I think, of date setters. And I've actually created this chart to help you understand some of the differences. And I think we're all aware of the more explicit, what I call the hardcore date setters. Now, those are what I would actually describe as dangerous people to follow because of how loose and how careless they are with the Word of God. But thankfully, most of us who have at least some spiritual discernment or interpretive hermeneutical ability can pretty easily distinguish these people, those YouTubers, those teachers, and we can avoid them. But it's the other group that's actually trickier. And I call them the softcore date setters. They're sort of date setters in disguise. And I'm actually going to do a video on this, hopefully in the future, expanding more on their arguments and some of the passages that they take out of context. But the softcore date setters are the ones to really watch because they're the ones that are trying to subtly move the goalposts on even the definition of the word imminence itself. They would have you to believe that they're against date setting, and that's what makes this so tricky. They will outwardly say we're against date setting, but all the while they're, like I said, subtly redefining things in order to accommodate their view, to bend it to their narrative. You'll see exactly what I mean as we continue. So here's going to be our outline for this video. I'm going to address a number of incorrect claims about imminence that many of these prophecy teachers are trying to convince their audiences of. Now, the first claim is that imminence does not mean any moment in an absolute sense, and it doesn't mean total signlessness. Imminence is connected with signs, they say, and they often give the example of the rumblings of a volcano to let you know that the eruption is imminent. So they try to connect signs with imminence. And the second claim I'll address is that imminence is an exponential curve throughout the church age, and each day that passes, the rapture becomes more imminent than the previous day. Imminence builds up over time based on the so-called acceleration of stage-setting tribulation signs and so-called prophetic convergence of signs. And so basically just the idea that imminence changes over time, that something can be more imminent at a certain point in time, and they connect this with signs. The third claim is imminence doesn't mean random dates. And that's kind of an interesting one that we're going to talk about briefly, but it's the only one of all of these that I don't disagree with. Now, the fourth claim is that imminence includes general tribulation stage-setting signs, as they call them, which they also call prophetic convergence signs that allow us to know we're close to the rapture. And they often use the analogy of Thanksgiving and Christmas to demonstrate this. Okay, so I'm going to address each of these and give the biblical view. All this is really incredibly simple, but people tend to make things difficult. But the Bible is actually very consistent and very straightforward on this. So let's start by looking at the first claim. Imminence does not mean any moment in an absolute sense. So in other words, imminence doesn't mean imminence. And it doesn't mean total signlessness. In other words, there can be some signs. There's some relevance of signs to imminence. They say imminence is connected with signs, and they give this example of the signs of a volcano to let you know the eruption of the volcano is imminent. Okay, so the first thing to understand is that when someone makes a claim that deviates from the traditional view and deviates from common sense and from the actual definition of the word, then the burden of proof is on them. It's not really our job to prove them wrong. It's their job to prove that their redefinition is legitimate. Now, the fact that they're redefining a word itself is an immediate proof that they're wrong. It's a blinking red light indicating to you there's a problem here. So how would a person prove their view if they're redefining a word in order to push that view? Well, all I have to do is open up the dictionary and they're proven wrong. Simple as that. So, of course, the first thing I'm going to do is show you simple proof that these people do not understand the English word imminence itself, and they're bending the meaning to fit their desired narrative. So let's look up the word imminence in the dictionary. First, let's go to dictionary.com and type in imminent. Well, the definition is, as you can see here, likely to occur at what? Any moment, or impending. So remember, they're telling us that it doesn't mean any moment. But I just looked it up in the dictionary and it says at any moment. So this really isn't very hard, guys. The dictionary tells us that imminence, in fact, does mean any moment. So you have to wonder why these prophecy teachers are trying so hard to convince you that imminent doesn't mean imminent when you can take 3 seconds to go look up the English word and see that they're lying to you. So let's look up the word impending now, since the definition that we just saw said impending is the same as imminent. Okay, so impending means about to happen or imminent. So about to happen means it can happen at any moment, meaning nothing else has to transpire first. It's something that can be expected at any time without preconditions or signs. Now, here also they give an example of impending. They mention a storm. They say that the storm is imminently threatening or menacing. In other words, the storm's about to begin at any moment. It's an impending storm because nothing else remains to happen first. Nothing else is left to happen to convince you that it could happen. It's expected to potentially break forth at any time. Now, this is a good transition into another aspect of this first claim, where these prophecy teachers will say imminence is connected with signs. It doesn't mean signlessness or at any moment without the need for signs. That's what they'll claim. They'll say that, in fact, imminence depends on signs. And therefore, people like myself are wrong when we say imminence means no more signs are needed in order to expect the occurrence of the imminent event. They'll often give the example of a volcano, like I mentioned, where the ground is rumbling and you feel the tremors and you see lava bubbling. And all those are the signs of the imminence of the volcano's eruption. So imminence is linked with signs, according to them. Now, guys, I hope you can already see the problem with this. It's so simple that it's actually pretty embarrassing for them to miss it this badly. And it's mind-numbing that people cannot see through this. Yes, of course, imminence can be used in a situation that already had past signs to convince you that the event is now imminent. But the point is that the event only becomes imminent once the signs or preconditions were done or complete. In this analogy, the volcano only became imminent once the signs were complete. In other words, once you already saw those things and it was in the past. It wasn't imminent before that. It only could be described as imminent once the prerequisites were satisfied. And so the same with the dictionary definition here, mentioning an impending or imminently threatening storm. Yes, I'm sure that in that example too, there were signs to let you know it's now imminent. The sky is dark, the wind is blowing, maybe you've even heard the distant rumbling of thunder. Yes, absolutely. Once those things are in the past, now the storm is imminent. There are no more future signs to look for. That's the key. There's nothing left to look for. You're now in a window where the beginning of the storm can occur at any moment. So yes, the definition of imminent really means signless and any moment. What these prophecy teachers are doing is using this volcano example to justify watching for modern day signs in the church age and somehow connecting them with imminence. No, the entire church age is the window where imminence is now active, and we can always expect the rapture on an ongoing, any moment basis. That's the whole point, because all the preconditions were completed in the past. And the New Testament teaching is that ever since then, there's nothing left to look for. Ever since the first century, we're not waiting to see anything else. There's no more signs. There's no more prerequisite prophecies. There's no more prophetic convergences or anything that they make up. We can simply expect the rapture at any time because everything that needed to be done was already done in the past. All the prerequisites were satisfied in the first century, which is why it's described as imminent from our perspective as church age believers. The apostles 2,000 years ago, guys, were not waiting to see any further signs or prerequisites. Now, what were those prerequisites? Well, obviously, Jesus came as a sinless sacrifice. He then poured out his spirit and established the church on the day of Pentecost. And if you apply the volcano analogy, those events were the signs or the preconditions that enabled the rapture afterwards then to become imminent. And it's been imminent ever since because nothing is left to be done. That was the bubbling of the lava. That was the rumblings, the tremors. And once they were done and complete and in the past, then and only then could the rapture and the volcano's eruption be seen as imminent. This is so easy. What the New Testament is telling us is that we as church age believers live in a time where all the tremors and rumblings and lava bubbling has already been completed. And now the entire age, the church age, is characterized by the impending eruption, if you will, of the rapture. There's nothing hard or contradictory about this. I'm not changing the definition. The date setters are. They're trying to put the rumbling and the lava and the tremors into the church age. Or even worse, they're positioning these things as signs. Excuse me. They're positioning these things as signs in the present and in the future, that we still have more to see potentially before we can expect it. Or that if you rewind 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago or 200 years ago, that those Christians of that time frame couldn't expect the rapture as truly imminent because they haven't yet seen what we've seen. No, that's incorrect. It's always been imminent because all those signs were done or preconditions were done in the first century. So that's the entire message of the New Testament. It's no, all those things were in the previous age, and we can now expect the return of the Lord at any moment because it's always at hand. It's always near. We're to expect it always as soon. It's always on the threshold. It's coming like a thief in the night, which by nature is something that can't be anticipated with signs. It's sudden, without warning, unpredictable, which is why the Lord always described his coming in that way. That was the consistent teaching, and that was what the apostles also agreed with. It could happen in their day at any moment, and they were ready for it. So when I heard someone making that claim about the volcano, guys, my head almost exploded. Yes, imminence, of course, can be used in a situation with preconditions or signs. It can be. It doesn't have to be. It can be. But it only becomes imminent once those signs are completed. It's that simple. And the only reason that you or I know anything about imminence today is because we heard about it from the New Testament authors writing 2,000 years ago, saying it was imminent back then. So the prerequisites were already completed, and the rapture was already imminent once they were writing their epistles. Now, of course, imminence can also be used in a complete situation of the complete absence of any signs at all. I'll give you an example. If I tell my wife that a friend of ours is going to drop by our house today at some point to give us something that they borrowed, let's say, then the arrival of the friend is imminent. It can happen today at any time without any preconditions or signs. There's nothing left that we're waiting to see. In fact, there never were any things. There was no sign at any point that let you know it's now imminent. The only precondition was me telling her that it's imminent. Now she can expect it as imminent. Friend could come by at any point today. So you can think of the rapture in that way too. All throughout the church age, we're told to be expecting our Savior Jesus to drop by at any moment with no signs or preconditions. That's the whole point, guys. He can simply arrive at any time from our perspective. And so imminence can be used in a situation with signs, or that there were signs first that let you now know it's imminent, which is what the rapture has been the entire church age. Or you can think of it as it can be used in a situation without signs or preconditions, which you can think of it that way too. There never were preconditions or signs anywhere in the church age that let you know the rapture is imminent. They were all completed with the coming of Jesus and the outpouring of the Spirit to initiate the church. And then ever since the church was initiated, basically, or at least ever since the scriptures were given, that's been the whole communication to the people, is that you should expect it at any moment. Even Jesus was saying it when he was still here at his first coming. He hadn't even left yet, and he was already telling them that's going to be the mentality that you're to possess on an ongoing basis. So imminence can be used in situations with or without signs or preconditions. But even when it's used in a situation that has signs or preconditions, it still doesn't change the definition. Once imminence takes effect, it takes for granted that those signs and preconditions are in the past. That's the simple point here, guys. Jesus was telling us the same thing about the rapture. If you're alive anytime during the church age, your direction, your directive, your instruction from the Lord is to always expect his return at all times, at any moment. Period. Simple. No asterisks or fine print. Nothing that you need to watch a prophecy channel to understand. It's that simple. And the fact that it hasn't happened in 2,000 years is not evidence that it's wrong to believe in imminence. The Apostle Paul wasn't wrong for believing that it could happen in his own lifetime prior to any modern day so-called signs. He was correct to expect that it could happen at any moment. The Lord's desire is that we always continually maintain that ongoing expectation of maybe today. That's the whole point. It's an impelling motivator towards faithfulness, towards holy living. The constant expectation of his coming is intended to be always expected on the immediate horizon for the Christian. That's why he never gave us any signs or anything other than himself to look for. So no, the volcano's eruption could not be described as imminent until all the preconditions were in the past and you're now in the eruption window. That's the point, guys. The entire church is the rapture window. Now, before we move on to the next claim, I want to show you the traditional long-standing view of imminence by pre-trib scholars. And you'll see as I show you these, how they apply the concept of imminence to the church regarding the rapture. Now, the first is by Dr. Renald Showers. And this is how he describes the definition of imminence and how we even got this word in English from the Latin. So as I read this, see if you think that this is any different from what I've been telling you throughout this whole video. See if I'm the one who's changing the definition. He says this: the English word imminent comes from the Latin verb immineo, imminere, which means to overhand or project. In light of this, the English word imminent means hanging over one's head, ready to befall or overtake one, close at hand in its incidence. Thus, an imminent event is one that's always hanging overhead, always, and is constantly ready to befall or overtake a person. Other things may happen before the imminent event, but nothing must take place before it happens. If something else must take place before an event can happen, that event is not imminent. The necessity of something else taking place first, like signs, destroys the concept of imminency. So that sounds like exactly what I've been saying. Now, here's another one. This is by Dr. Wayne Brindle, and he applies the concept of imminence specifically to the rapture. And he says, the term imminence or imminency, as applied to the rapture of the church, means that Christ may return at any moment for his church, and no biblically predicted event must necessarily precede it. There are no signs, in other words. Those who believe that Christ will return for his church before the tribulation, which is us, pre-tribulationists, we normally hold that the rapture is imminent, that it may occur at any time What did he just say? Any time, any moment. That's the standard view. And that it's the next predicted event in God's prophetic timetable. No signs. There's nothing else that has to happen first. So again, that sounds like exactly what I've been telling you. Now, here's what one Bible commentary says about the Greek word harpazo, which is the underlying Greek word used in the New Testament referring to the rapture. It says this: harpazo conveys the idea of force suddenly exercised, and also well rendered by the English verb to snatch, to seize, to take or grasp something or someone abruptly or hastily, with emphasis on the idea of suddenness or quickness. So this is what Jesus means when he says he's coming quickly and soon and shortly and that he's near. It means exactly this, that he will come imminently, suddenly, hastily, abruptly. All these words by very nature contradict any possibility of any signs to alert you that it's coming. They're total opposites from that. And that's the entire point. Something that occurs suddenly can't have signs, can it? No, of course not. If it had signs, it couldn't be described as sudden, because then it wouldn't be sudden. It alerts you ahead of time. It lets you anticipate it. It contradicts the definition. So you can't have both. But all throughout the New Testament, this aspect of the Lord's parousia, or his coming, is described always as being sudden and unpredictable. It always describes it this way without fail, and it never gives us any signs to look for that we have to see first, that will allow us to calculate it or anticipate it or alert us that it's going to happen in the next 10 years or 5 years or 2 years or something general or anything at all. No, we're always supposed to expect it as impending, close at hand in its incidence, always ready to befall or overtake us at any moment, like we just read. You can't redefine imminence like these softcore date setters try to do. Either you believe in plain definitional imminence or you don't. It doesn't matter how many superficial, non-Berean YouTube subscribers you stand to lose. It doesn't matter. You have to stand on truth, or you got to stop calling yourself a Bible teacher. It's that plain and simple. I have a few more quotes for you. The next one is scholar Dr. Gerald B. Stanton, and he identified three key elements related to the imminence of the rapture. And he said this: imminence in relation to the rapture has been defined as consisting of three elements: the certainty that he may come at any moment. Everyone got that? At any moment. That's the standard definition. The next thing is the uncertainty of the time of that arrival and the fact that no prophesied event stands between the believer and that hour. All right, so based on that, we can say that imminency involves the certainty of the rapture, the uncertainty of when it will take place, and the absence of any prerequisite signs or events. It's an any moment expectation that doesn't depend on any other events or happenings. Now, the next quote is from an extremely well-respected scholar, like all these are, Dr. Paul Feinberg, and he wrote this: there is no mention of any signs or events that precede the rapture of the church in any of the rapture passages. The point seems to be that the believer, prior to this event, is to look not for some sign, but for the Lord from heaven. So it's exactly what I've been telling you guys. Imminence doesn't mean that there are convergences to look for or some future so-called acceleration of these alleged signs. No, it means that we don't look for some sign, as he said here, but for the Lord from heaven. Okay, so there's also a quote from Dr. J. Dwight Pentecost that I want to show you. And he's also extremely well known in the pre-trib dispensational camp. And he says, many signs were given to the nation Israel, which would precede the second advent. And he's talking about the coming of the Lord in power and glory at the end of the tribulation, so that the nation Israel might be living in expectancy when the time of his coming should draw nigh. Now notice what he says. To the church, no such signs were ever given. The church was told to live in the light of the imminent coming of the Lord, to translate them in his presence. And he gives a bunch of scripture passages. And he continues, Such passages as 1 Thessalonians 5:6, Titus 2:13, and Revelation 3:3 all warn the believer to be watching for what? The Lord himself, not for signs that would precede his coming. All right, and so Pentecost too agrees that it's actually a dispensational distinctive, how Israel was always given signs and the church was never given signs. It's part of what makes Israel and the church distinct as two separate entities within God's larger program for humanity. And lastly, I want to give you also this quote from Dr. John Walvoord, and he's been called the greatest dispensational scholar of the past century. So he says this in 1 Thessalonians 5, it is revealed that the day of the Lord comes suddenly and unexpectedly. It is described, the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. A thief in the night comes unheralded. There are no signs that pertain to a thief. And so he tells us here that the day of the Lord, just like the rapture, is imminent. And he correctly understands the simple example of the thief. As he says, the thief example is incompatible with signs. So anytime you come across the thief in the night parable in the New Testament at any time, or the equivalent master returning home to cross the threshold, to enter into his house. Either of these parables, you always know the exact context, the parousia of Christ, or the beginning of what we call the end times, when the rapture and the beginning of the broad period of the day of the Lord take place. So these scholars remind us of the true biblical instruction, watchfulness for the Lord himself. No signs are compatible. This is the only kind of watchfulness that's congruent with the biblical teaching of imminence. And they all agree that imminence, by definition, means an any moment possibility that has no signs or preconditions. So again, I ask, who is redefining imminence? It's not me. I'm just willing to accept the standard English definition and understand that's exactly how the Bible presents the rapture, which is why people like the ones I've just quoted to you and people for generations have always used this term imminence to describe it. So the first claim by the softcore date setters is wildly inaccurate on every level, but it's only going to get worse as you will, I'm sure, see in the second claim. And it's so, as you're going to see, this second claim is so embarrassingly wrong that it really undermines the credibility of the person who would teach this view. They get it so wrong on a fundamental level that I really don't know why anybody would trust them on anything else. If they get it so wrong here on something so basic and so easy, there's no telling what they're getting wrong in other areas. So again, this is really basic and easy stuff. This is actually standard English at a 6th grade level. I looked it up. And yet the people pushing this stuff claim to be scholars. It's pretty sad for them. So the second claim is that imminence is an exponential curve throughout the church age, that it gradually increases. And every day that passes, the rapture becomes more imminent than the previous day. That's the key, more imminent. They say that imminence builds up over time based on the acceleration of stage setting tribulation signs and so-called prophetic convergence of signs. So they make up all these phrases, acceleration, prophetic convergence. You'll hear them talk about rapture windows, stage setting, tribulation signs. And the only of those that I can even really sort of agree with is the stage setting, the use of the word stage setting to describe things that will happen or potentially could happen before the tribulation starts. But yet the problem even there is that we don't have to see any of those things. We're not told that we would see those things, and we're not told exactly what they are. They're more our inferences, and they're never used to calculate dates of the rapture. So stage setting, if you want to call like the return of national Israel a stage setting for the tribulation, well, yeah, because we know that national Israel is going to be in the land in the tribulation. So it's going to happen at some point, but it doesn't have to happen before the rapture. It's not a precondition for the rapture to occur. It's not something that the Bible tells us as church age believers that we need to look for in order to then and only then believe that the rapture is imminent or more imminent or imminent enough to expect it. No, it's not connected with the rapture in any way, actually. So um, this second claim is really going to be easy to debunk as well, but I just wanted to say that first. Now, you don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to even be a college graduate. Honestly, you don't even have to be a high school graduate to understand this. You just have to be a sixth grade student, because that's the level that we're talking about. So let's first take on the part about imminence being an exponential curve, that it increases over time. And in fact, the rapture supposedly gets more imminent each day that goes by. So that's really the question here. Can something become more imminent? Does that even make sense? If the answer is yes, then it's possible for this claim about imminence being related to so-called signs accelerating to be correct. But if the answer is no, that there's no such thing as more imminent, if that's logically contradictory in and of itself, then it shoots down the entire argument completely. We don't even have to go any further. So let's first do some sixth grade English review and remind ourselves of the contrast between absolute adjectives or non-gradable adjectives versus gradable adjectives. Now, if you don't recall, adjectives describe qualities or characteristics of nouns, and some qualities can vary in intensity or grade. For example, something can be described as rather hot, hot, or very hot. Similarly, they can also be called hot, hotter, hottest. The adjective hot is a gradable adjective. It has different degrees or different grades of intensity. But on the other hand, there's qualities that cannot vary in intensity or grade because they are either extremes or absolutes. An example of an extreme is freezing. An example of an absolute is dead. These are called non-gradable adjectives because they don't have varying degrees or varying grades of intensity. They either are or they aren't. And because of this, it would be illogical to use a grading adverb with a non-gradable adjective. So in other words, you can't say the dog was very dead. You can't say the dog was more dead. Dead is already an absolute. It already means 100% dead. There's no degrees of dead. And some other examples are words like perfect or empty or complete. Well, guess what the word imminent is? It's also one of these, a non-gradable or an absolute adjective. And just to prove it to you, I'll show you this. I asked Google AI, this question. I asked it, is imminent an absolute adjective? And here's the answer. I'll read it to you. Yes, imminent is considered an absolute adjective because it describes something that is about to happen, meaning it can't be compared in terms of degree. Something is either imminent or it isn't, making it an absolute descriptor. And it also says, when you say something is imminent, it means it is on the verge of happening. So you can't say something is more imminent than something else. Did you hear that? You can't say something's more imminent. It doesn't make sense. It continues. As an example, then it uses a storm, like we mentioned earlier. Or you can think of a volcano, like we mentioned, the favorite example of some of these prophecy teachers. And it goes on to say this, the storm is imminent. You can't say the storm is more imminent than before. What? You can't say the storm is more imminent than before because imminent already implies something that's about to occur. Okay, and so you also can't say that about a volcano. You also can't say that about the rapture or anything else because it's logically contradictory. All right, so I've just shown that no, imminence is not an exponential curve that increases every day or at any time or even can increase. No, the rapture is not more imminent today than yesterday because there's no such thing as more imminent. It's logically contradictory in the English language. And so this just goes to show how little these people who are pushing this stuff understand the word imminence itself. And you probably shouldn't be looking to them as legitimate Bible teachers if they mess this up so bad, the things that are on a sixth grade level. They could have Googled this in 2 minutes or less, but they instead chose to make multi-hour long videos spewing this false information that they obviously didn't put any effort into validating. And if someone like me can come along and cut these things down with a simple Google search, then those same people probably shouldn't be considered trustworthy authorities on any of these topics. and it really makes you wonder how sincere they actually are. Now, just for fun and for further explanation, I wanted to see what ChatGPT would have to say about this. So I asked it if an imminent event can logically be more imminent tomorrow than today, which is a claim of these date setters. And of course, it told me the exact same thing that I just showed you from the Google AI, based on the fact that imminent is an absolute adjective. Now, here's a few examples of the answers that I got, all saying basically the same thing, just expressed in slightly different ways. Now, I'll read you a couple of these. It says imminent typically means that something is on the verge of happening, usually in the very near future, likely or like an event that will occur within hours or days. So if an event is imminent today, that means it's expected to happen soon. But tomorrow, the event will still be imminent if it's still expected to happen soon, perhaps within a similar time frame. But we can't really say it's more imminent. The reason is that imminence implies that the event is already extremely close, and the concept of it becoming more imminent would suggest some sort of gradient or additional urgency. In other words, different degrees, which they say here doesn't fit the standard definition. Now, here's another answer, also from ChatGPT. Same question, but they give you slightly different answers, saying the same thing. So it says, interesting question. The term imminent generally refers to something that's about to happen very soon, typically within a short time frame. If something is imminent today, it's already at the threshold of happening soon. If you say something is more imminent tomorrow than today, it implies that in some way its proximity to happening increases. Logically, that's a bit tricky. Imminence doesn't usually have degrees. Something either is imminent or it's not. Now I'll read you one more. It says, in strict logical sense, no. An event that is imminent is already understood to be something that's going to happen very soon, likely within the immediate future. If the event happens tomorrow instead of today, it is still imminent, but the idea of something being more imminent than it already was would be a matter of subjective perspective rather than logic. In other words, it's not logical. It just seems more imminent to you because we're one day closer, but it's not actually the definition of imminence. All right, so I think I've said enough on that. Imminence is not an exponential curve that increases due to signs, and it does not get more imminent every day. It cannot even do so logically or at any particular time versus other times. Sorry, that's just not how the word imminent works in the English language. So if you want to make up a belief about prophetic convergence signs or some sort of tribulation stage setting signs, fine, you can go ahead and do that. It's not biblical, but you're free to do it. But you need to stop saying that you believe in imminence, because you don't. You're misapplying a word that you don't even understand. So you're obviously free to move away from the traditional pre-trib understanding and the normal dictionary definition, but you don't get to redefine words or twist them to suit your narrative, all the while claiming that people like me are the ones attacking imminence. No, only somebody who's twisting, misapplying, and redefining a concept or a word can be the one who's actually doing the attacking. So let's now move on to the third claim, which is going to be quick and easy. The third claim is imminence doesn't mean random dates. Imminence doesn't mean randomness. Now, this is, like I said at the beginning, this is the only one of all these claims that I actually agree with. But I chose to include it because although I agree with this claim, it demonstrates that the person making the claim doesn't even understand the position that he claims to be critiquing or challenging. So in other words, I've never heard of anyone who believes like I believe, or anyone at all, ever, claiming that the rapture date is random, or by saying I believe in rapture imminence, I'm really saying that I believe it's random. I've never heard that ever. So what is the truth about the rapture's timing? Well, from God's perspective, the timing of the rapture is definite. It has a fixed future time that only the Father knows. Let me say that again. It's not random. It has a definite, established, fixed future time that only the Father knows. It's been established since before the universe, I'm quite sure. I'm sure that God the Father always knew the exact moment and that this would take place. So I'm not really sure where they get this word random. I've never heard anybody refer to the rapture, the timing of the rapture, as being random. But the timing of the rapture is unknown from our perspective as humans, as Christians. We don't know. Nobody knows. It can happen at any moment, but that doesn't mean that it's random. There's no connection at all between those two things. Our instruction at all times is to perpetually expect it at any moment. We were never told to try to figure out when it's going to happen or that we even can figure it out. I know that that comes as a shock to many people who follow these date setting channels, but the Great Commission doesn't include rapture calculations. I promise. We were never told to make predictions. We were never told that we even could make predictions. We were never told to look for any signs because we were never told that there are any signs. Our instruction is so incredibly simple and straightforward. It's to look for Jesus himself, just like the homeowner in that parable of the thief has to watch for the sudden, unpredictable, signless arrival of the thief himself. There are no signs of the thief. Guys, we just need to let the Bible speak. Jesus constantly uses this imminence analogy of the thief, precisely because a thief gives no signs of his coming. A thief doesn't herald his arrival. He doesn't broadcast it by giving signs to the homeowner. He could come at any time, so you just have to keep watching for him. That's Jesus's point about his own coming, his parousia, which begins with the rapture of the church. And he does the same exact thing with the analogy of the unknown, unpredictable, sudden, signless return of the master to his house, where his arrival is to be expected at all times by his servants as an any moment possibility on an ongoing basis. There's no amount of time that he has to be away before he can be expected by the servants. They're to expect him at any moment, that his entrance is always impending. He's always to be seen as being on the threshold of entrance. There are no signs, so the servants have to constantly watch for their Lord, meaning be ready for his return. That's the point. It's so easy, but people make it hard because they refuse to accept the simple truth when it's so simple. They have to play detective and try to find things to look for. No, just look for Jesus. That's all you need to do. All right, let's move now to the fourth claim, which is the idea that imminence includes tribulation stage setting signs, as they call them, which they also refer to as prophetic convergence signs that allow us to know that we're close to the rapture. And they often use the analogy of Thanksgiving and Christmas to demonstrate this. They also make the claim commonly that the New Testament authors didn't actually expect an any moment rapture, but instead expected that at some distant point in their lives in the future, the stage setting signs could accelerate to the point where the rapture could then be seen as imminent and that they could then expect it. So it wasn't any moment, it requires acceleration of signs first. Although, as we've already seen, that's contrary to the actual definition of imminence. Now, this has already been a long video, and I could literally spend hours just on this one question. So I don't want to do that here. I just want to point out some of the circular reasoning or the logical fallacies of this claim. They're claims that they're just logically incoherent and they're completely self-defeating. And I could go through numerous Bible passages and show you that even in the Greek, all the New Testament authors who have disagreed with this idea that the rapture couldn't be any moment actually expected it at any moment. And I do that in other videos and in articles and in the book. But let me just poke some obvious holes in this reasoning. So first of all, these softcore date setters admit on their own videos that none of this so-called acceleration or prophetic convergence actually tells us how far away we are from the rapture, because they say, well, we don't know how much stage setting there needs to be. Okay, but that's what I'm saying. I'd be the first one to say there's some interesting things happening in the world, and there have been. And maybe, possibly, they could have some connection with the way God will bring certain end time prophecies or tribulation prophecies to pass. But we can't be dogmatic on this. We can't even be sure about that because we don't know for sure. We're finite. We don't know that's how God's going to bring it to pass. We could be here for another 100 years, and the technology or the geopolitical situation or whatever they're calling signs could be completely different. That's why I can enjoy following some of these developments without linking them to predicting the rapture. They don't give us any ability to calculate anything or predict anything or to know that we're generally close or generally far or anything like that. We don't know for sure that they'll even be relevant. If we're honest, we don't. We think they may, but we don't know. It's only our opinions, it's our assumptions. And so then they aren't signs that allow us to say the rapture is close. No, the rapture is always close. And these prophecy teachers will often admit that. But here's what I want you to note. In the same breath, they'll claim them as convergent signs that tell us the rapture is super imminent on that curve compared to before. Well, even if imminence could work that way, which we've shown it can't and it doesn't, what you just did is circular and self-defeating. I hope everyone can easily see that. See, they want their cake and they want to eat it too. But I want to make sure you guys get this so you can see that this is circular reasoning. It's so easy. You will hear them say on one hand that no signs tell us how close we are for sure. And the stage setting signs can go on for an unknown period into the future because we don't know how far things have to progress. But then they'll say, we know the rapture is generally near because we're seeing this convergence of these stage setting signs for the tribulation. Well, which is it? And if you spend so much time, by the way, and energy emphasizing these so-called tribulation setting signs, stage setting signs, yet they give you absolutely no predictive benefit, then again, I have to keep asking, in what way are they acting as signs? It's not how a sign works. And even if you say in the first century that they were seeing stage setting signs just on a lower level, then in what rational sense can you say it was near to them back then if it hasn't happened yet in 2,000 years? By your definition, you can't say that's near. By my definition, which is imminence, I can because that's what imminence means. It's always near. But by that definition, if you're looking at signs to determine it, and that's why you're saying it's near, that seeing some signs tell you it's near, then that's illogical. There is no way you can use the word near to describe something that's 2,000 years away and still hasn't happened. If you're using that word near because of some signs. And that's because nearness has nothing to do with seeing some level of signs or some so-called stage setting, but it's rather the exact opposite. What I told you about imminence, that's near is simple New Testament imminence language. It's that simple. The Lord's coming is always described as near, soon, at hand, coming quickly, coming shortly. It means imminently, and it's perspective based. It's from our perspective, we're intended to always see it that way, that the rapture is always near at any point in the church age, since there are no signs left that we have to wait for. It's always perpetually near. It's always to be thought of as near. If 1,000 years pass, it's still to be thought of as near or any moment. It's the intended mindset that the Lord wants us to always have. It's that simple. And it can only be understood logically, this understanding of near, if that's the case. It can't be near because of signs, because in no way can 2,000 years qualify as near in the sense of it's going to happen soon because I'm seeing these signs that tell me it will. No, and it hasn't. So you're misunderstanding these words. You can't say that there are stage setting events or signs before the rapture that let us know we're close, and yet also say we don't know how close we are because we don't know how much stage setting there will be. That's circular reasoning by definition. It's a logical fallacy, and even a child could see through this. And I'm literally quoting, like basically word for word verbatim, what I've heard these softcore date setters say on their own channels. I listen in once in a while just to see what they're saying. And this is what they say, virtually word for word. Listen, if we don't know how much stage setting there needs to be, then in what way are these signs that indicate nearness? That's absurd. By definition, it's literally absurd. It's the opposite of the basic definition of a sign. Signs can't be indefinite. They can't just go on in perpetuity without ever cluing you into how close the destination event is. Otherwise, they are not signs. They're not signs that you can use in any helpful way to determine distance or nearness of something. So then they aren't helpful as signs. And a sign in the true sense, and in the sense that they're using it, means a prerequisite. So if you can't definitively name what the signs are that have to take place before the rapture can arrive, then they aren't prerequisite signs at all. None of this makes any sense. It's all just cognitive dissonance, and it's all contradictory to the plain definition of imminence. Well, let me wrap this up, and I really appreciate you guys watching. I hope that you were able to receive this teaching in the spirit that it was intended, not as an attack on anybody, but just to call out the pseudo-scholarship, the sensationalism, the shoddy hermeneutics of these teachers. We have to call out bad ideas and be Bereans and not allow these so-called teachers to hijack the traditional view in order to tickle the ears of the masses. We have to stand on truth, no matter the consequences. And look, you guys know I'm correct about this. Just look at the view count on these date-setting rapture videos, and then go look at the view count on a video of a pastor doing expositional Bible teaching. There's no comparison. People flock to the exciting, shiny new object, and they have no use, rather, for someone who's actually teaching sound Bible truth. That's a case study that you can do on YouTube for yourself on why these people are incentivized to leave truth behind in favor of something that will attract the masses. They know that they can't attract the same number of people if they're not constantly talking about signs. So be careful who you're following. And again, like I told you, there's a gradient to this date setting thing. Not everyone's a hardcore date setter. Not everyone's actually naming a calendar day that they're saying the rapture has a high percentage of a chance. We're convinced that it's going to happen on this particular day. Not everyone's doing that. There are softcore date setters who are going to tell you up front, I don't believe in setting a date. But yet they're going to tell you there's signs associated with the rapture that can now tell us we're close. So there's a lot of deception out there, guys. And I'm not saying that's everyone, but regardless, you have to hold them accountable for the message that they're teaching. So as we close, I want to encourage you to purge some of the rapture entertainment channels from your day-to-day routine and instead spend time looking into God's word as a Berean to see for yourself if these things are true that you're being told every day, things that you've heard repeated ad nauseum for maybe decades that you've just took as being true and you haven't really held it under scrutiny. You need to scrutinize these things and just use common sense and simple research like we just did in this video. A lot of things they say you can just debunk with very minimal effort like I did today. So again, thank you all for watching. God bless you, and I will see you guys on the next video.